With movie theaters shuttered across much of North America due to the pandemic, there is trepidation out there about what the future looks like for the silver screen and the cinemas that house them. Will streaming overtake the in-person theater experience for film buffs? Or can movie houses bounce back? With us to consider that, we welcome, in Picton, Ontario, Alexandra Seay. She's the general manager of the Regent Theatre. In Niagara Falls, Ontario, filmmaker April Mullen, director of the recently released thriller Wander. In the beaches in the capital city, there's Peter Howell, movie critic for the Toronto Star and president of the Toronto Film Critics Association. And in downtown TO, Dan Peel, operator of the Royal Cinema. Great to have all of you four on TVO tonight. I want to just set up our conversation by reading some numbers here that are, frankly, quite staggering. Here we go. The global cinema industry is set to lose $32 billion in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's a 71.5% reduction in box office revenue compared to 2019. That according to a recent report by media and tech research firm Omdia. Peter, when you examine the movie industry landscape, I mean, that number says something, but from your vantage point, how bleak does it look right now?
It's as bleak as the bleakest horror movie you could imagine. But I think that, interestingly enough, the executives of some of the major firms, they're treating it more like a thriller. They're hoping that they'll come out at the end and, Harrison Ford will save the world. Like, for example, Ellis Jacob of Cineplex, I've read an interview with him. He's very bullish on what's going to happen once the vaccines are widely available. He thinks people will return to theaters. And Adam Aron of AMC, they managed to stave off bankruptcy last week with a big cash infusion. And he's optimistic for the rest of the year. So it's hard to argue with that.
Okay, well, let's put that optimism in our back pockets for the moment. We're still going to set up what's going on out there, and then we'll find out later on if we have reason to be optimistic. April, before I ask you a question,
yes.
Why don't we do this? Let's show a clip of your film, okay? Is that a good idea?
Sounds good.
Let's show everybody what you've been up to. Sheldon, if you would. This is from Wander.
You killed my daughter and destroyed my family. I don't know who you are, but I'm coming for you.
You're a good man, Arthur. A silent warrior.
I am powerful. I am protected.
I've always had a gut feeling that there was some link between here and what happened to your family.
Tommy Lee Jones. And you are here to tell the tale that you worked with Tommy Lee Jones and survived the experience. Well done. Tell me this, though. From the time you started thinking about this movie, working on this movie, filming this movie, doing the whole 9 yards, how much time did that take?
5 full years of dedication, focus, and never giving up.
And after 5 full years of that kind of effort, the knowledge that this movie is not going to have the big screen portrayal that you would have hoped for, how problematic is that for you?
Coming out of the gate, we were hoping to make it through, and we were postponed by 2 months because of COVID. All of our post houses were down. We had to do remote color correction, sound design, and everything was done remotely. We were behind on our deadlines, of course, by 2 months. And then there was the festival release, and we were hoping to go to Cannes, and Cannes as well had to put everything on hold because of COVID, as well as the director's fortnight, which in an indie film world with indie producers, that is our launching pad. So that's where we get to set the film up for the whole world and for everyone to see it. So, we had to reinvent what we were envisioning for the film and how to get it out there faster for people with, the need of content in the new world that we were facing.
Was it just an awful kick in the gut?
Behind closed doors, it was a big kick in the gut because of 5 years, is a long time. You want to celebrate with the audience. That's what we make movies for. We want to celebrate and enjoy the film and watch others, in a community setting to see the film on the big screen. But there's always tomorrow, and we're working our butts off again to get the next film going.
Annie did say that. The sun will come out tomorrow. Let's see. Alexandra, tell us what you've been doing at the Regent Theatre over the past 10 months.
Well, we closed like all the other theaters in March of last year, but since then we've been really very busy. We, like many other organizations, have pivoted. In our case, we have equipped ourselves to live stream. We are not only a cinema, but we're also a live music venue. And so we can now live stream our performances with or without an audience. And so that's something that we've been focusing a lot on recently. We've also run a major fundraising campaign to get us through this and to improve the accessibility of our theater, moving more towards creating a cinema experience. Because I think when we come back from this COVID time, the new normal will be an audience that desires a different experience that they can't get at home. It's more than just the content they're seeing on the big screen. It's got to be the whole experience that comes with it. And so we're working hard to get ahead of that and to make our theater, both in terms of our physical auditorium as well as our bar and concession, more of an experience for our audience.
Understood. Now, I see how the fundraiser would bring in money, but what about the content and the programming? Does that bring in any revenue for you?
At the moment, there's very limited programming that we're able to do, and virtual streams of films is also something we've been doing, but that is not a moneymaker by any stretch of the imagination. It's more of a community engagement tactic for us to keep our communities engaged with us and engaged with the kind of content that we would typically be producing on the big screen.
Gotcha. Dan, what's been going on at the Royal for the last 10 months?
Basically the same thing as the Regent. We've been closed since March to the public. We have taken this opportunity to start renovating the theater. The plaster, the paint, all that sort of thing has been worked on, and it's really looking beautiful. We are as well pivoting to a kind of a live streaming format with 4K remote cameras. We have all new LED lighting, so hopefully we'll be able, like the Regent, to stream live performances, whether it be concerts or a theater, live theater, that sort of thing. In our business model, when we acquired the Royal 15 years ago, we incorporated a post-production facility within the venue as well. So the large stage, the large theater, we can actually use as a mixing theater and have been since then, albeit movie independent film has been drastically reduced since March. It is starting to come back now, and we're seeing signs of bookings for that type of work in the short future here.
Those things you just mentioned don't sound cheap. How much money have you had to spend to do all that?
We've spent quite a bit. The owner of the Royal is a philanthropist. He believes in the Royal, in its location on College Street, and what it does and what it had been doing for the independent filmmaker community and the general community, the public. So he's kept going and kept his commitment to make it as beautiful as we can.
I didn't hear a number there, Dan. You want to say a number? You don't have to if you don't want to, but I am going to ask.
I won't comment on the number.
Okay. Have you had to lay anybody off?
It's large. Well, certainly our programming staff has been idled since March. Our concession staff, obviously the place is dark. Other than the workmen that are there painting and plastering, we don't have our family working there right now.
Alexandra, how about you? Have you had to lay people off?
We have had to put people on hiatus. We have had to lay some people off. We operate with a largely volunteer front of house staff, and they have also been put on hiatus. So the challenge for us is keeping them engaged during this dark period.
Right. Peter, do you have any idea, or have you heard whether or not, when the theaters were still allowed to be open, and they were open for a time after COVID had hit after all, right? The first case of COVID is December, and the theaters were allowed to be open until, I guess, March. Have you heard of anybody getting COVID-19 in a theater setting?
No, I mean that's a point that a lot of theater owners make, is that I think there's like almost zero across North America, which is one of the reasons why they're so upset about, like in Ontario, for example, the drive-in theaters have been closed under this current lockdown. That doesn't make any sense at all. But you know, I know the theater exhibitors and the filmmakers, they don't understand why theaters have been included in the same restrictions you find elsewhere.
April, can you tell us now, given that you won't be able to release this on the silver screen as you had hoped, your movie Wander, what's the plan now to get it out in front of people's eyeballs?
So it's been released on all on-demand platforms and digital platforms, North American wide. And to stand out in a very, very busy platform, you have to make your mark. So we had a lot of press, a lot of lead up. People like Peter Howell, critics really matter. Rotten Tomatoes matters more than ever. Twitter, Instagram, all the social aspects to sort of get the word of mouth and the buzz going is all we have. So you really have to try to implement new and innovative ways to get your film to stand out on a new platform without the visuals, like, heading into the subway and you see a poster of Wander that really makes an impact. So how do you stand out in a very, very busy screen world is the next challenge.
That's it. I mean, you're up against literally thousands and thousands of movie titles on things, on the streaming services. I don't know which ones you're on and which ones you're not, but I mean, is it doubly difficult to try to get attention in this universe as opposed to in the previous universe when you could be on the theater screens?
I think it's equally, difficult as an independent film coming up against big blockbusters. I think the landscape is always vast and people will choose and gravitate towards the content they want. So you just have to make sure they can see your film and it's available on the platform that they choose. It's kind of like an on-demand consumerism right now, and they want it when they want it at the time they want it. And you just have to make sure that Wander's an option. And maybe they saw, some of the interviews on, the Today Show, and all of those things matter, I think, because we're all connected through media right now.
Gotcha. Peter, have you, I don't know, in my life, I can't ever recall a time when the theaters have been dark for this long a period of time, this kind of almost existential hit to the movie business. Can you recall anything similar?
Well, not in my lifetime, though. If you go back 100 years to the Spanish flu of the early 1900s or the early 20th century, but there's absolutely nothing to compare with it. I mean, I guess you could talk about how the advent of television, in the 50s and 60s, how that had a big effect. A lot of theaters closed through that, but this is nothing. That was nothing compared to what's happening now.
So based on what you're hearing, how able are the people who run the movie business? What kinds of ideas are they coming up with to roll with these punches? Well,
they're being really resourceful, as you can hear from Alexandra and Dan. And also, I think there does seem to be a trend now that you'll see the smaller movie houses or the single screen type movie houses will become all event spaces. Like, for example, the Paradise Theatre on Bathurst Street reopened, actually on Bloor Street in Toronto. It reopened after decades being closed. It opened in December 2019, and it had to close like 3 months later. It's an absolutely beautiful Art Deco building now. And I know they're just itching to go with what they can do. So I think everybody's in a state of suspended animation, hoping that they can last long enough for everybody to get vaccinated and go back. And I think the crowds will go back. I think people will return to theaters. They want to.
I went to the Paradise Theatre last year, obviously before the pandemic hit. It is gorgeous. They've done a fabulous job, bringing that place back. It's really wonderful. Alexandra, let's do a little sort of before and after. Before the pandemic, what could people expect out of a night at the Regent?
Well, I'll get to that, but I should just riff off something Peter just said. He managed the Spanish flu in 1918. We actually opened our doors for the very first time in 1918. And we survived that pandemic. So I have every confidence that we're going to survive this pandemic too.
Hear, hear.
But pre-pandemic, at the Regent, we were a very lo-fi, let's say. We're a lo-fi space. We operate on a cash basis. You get a physical ticket. You get a friendly volunteer who shows you to your seat. We have all the normal concession offerings, popcorn, and every chocolate bar you could possibly think of. It's a vintage experience in our space, and it's one that local county folk who have grown up here have grown up with. It's very close to home for a lot of people. We are the community local, and so we need to preserve that moving forward. But moving forwards, what we're doing is we are elevating the tone and texture of the space, if you will. We are reconfiguring our bar so that it can host events as a standalone space. For example, our heritage is also Art Deco, and much like the Paradise, although with a smaller budget, we too are really embracing that heritage and uplifting the space so that it can be an event space and a place where you can have a glass of bubbly or a fancy cocktail before the show and then go into the show, whether it's a movie or whether it's a live show.
Gotcha. Now, I'm here at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton right now, and probably within 25 yards of where I'm sitting right now, there are 20 screens. Not open right now, obviously, but on a normal occasion there are. Do I assume, Alexandra, you're the only game in town for a long way around?
We are the only game in town. You got to go to Belleville, which is pretty far for the county folk. You got to go far to get another cinema. In fact, you have to go that far to get another purpose-built performance space. We're the only game in town.
And I also assume you're one screen, not multiplex?
That's correct. We are one screen. We have 450 approximately seats, and we are one screen. Yes.
Isn't that fabulous? You are what we would call the good old days. Today. The good old days are today.
We are, and we're trying to preserve that and move it forward into the 20th century.
April, I saw you waving. What's that about?
No, I was just applauding the fact that they're still open and giving my gratitude.
That's a beautiful thing.
And if I may, I'd love to just piggyback on something April said earlier, which is, there's a dearth of content, but there's also a real window of opportunity, I think, in the near future for us independent exhibitors, the Regent being one of them, to really give a leg up to Canadian filmmakers and Canadian artists during this window when we can't have large houses. We have nothing to lose by taking what in normal times might be perceived as a chance on a Canadian film, on a longer run, on a big screen. And so that's certainly something that we're prioritizing here at the Regent for when we can open doors.
How's that sound to you, April?
The Royal actually hosted my very first premiere of my very first film 15 years ago, Rock, Paper, Scissors, and it was an event where we brought college students from across the country where they performed on stage, and then we showed the film. So theaters like that, make or break for independent filmmakers in the country.
Dan, I want to ask you about the fairness of the way things are right now. I think, and I can't remember how many months ago it was for Christopher Nolan's new movie, Tenet. I actually went to see that in a movie theater, and there were 3 of us in the movie theater. And I kept my mask on the whole time. Who knows why? It's whatever. There were 300 seats in there, and there were 3 people. It was a 10 o'clock at night showing. Do you think there was a way to keep cinemas open during the course of this lockdown and do it safely so that people would feel comfortable enough coming to the movies?
I think so. I think from the point that you just mentioned, in a room of good size, you can space people out and keep them distanced and keep them safe. Unfortunately, for the single screen venues like the Royal and the Regent, it's difficult if you're limited to 50 people, I think it was during the summer that you were allowed to open. It's very challenging for us to make a go of it with only 50 people allowed in the room from a financial perspective. By the time you pay the distributors and pay the staff, we don't have volunteer staff at the Royal, projectionists, cleaning staff, that sort of thing. So from a distancing perspective, yes, and from a financial model, no.
Alexandra, how about you? Was there a way to keep the cinemas open during the last 10 months, do it safely, and yet have you guys still make a living at the same time?
I think there is a way for us to do that, or was a way potentially for us to have done that in the past. We are in a slightly different position because we do operate with a lot of volunteers, but even so, it is not a moneymaker with 50 people in the house. So to make money on something, not so much. To break even, possibly. And I think that's what we'll be coming back to, is a position where we're looking at breaking even, not making money until we can have full capacity crowds again.
Okay. Peter, I want to bring you in here and talk about the new business model that seems to be taking over the North American cinema situation, which is, for example, last month, Warner Brothers announced that it's going to release its 2021 slate of movies simultaneously on streaming services and in theaters. Obviously, if the theaters aren't open, that doesn't matter. But this notion of an exclusive window for cinemas to play movies before they go to streaming services, it looks like that's disappearing. What do you think about all that?
That was a seismic decision by Warner's that has upset the industry quite a bit. I mean, you have major movies like Dune and The Matrix 4 that are going to appear online, never expected to be done that way. And Denis Villeneuve, the Canadian director who made Dune, he's extremely upset. He called Warner's out over that. In Canada, for example, it's kind of strange. We don't get HBO Max in Canada, so those movies will appear in theaters, but I think they'll also be heading to streaming a lot sooner. The problem is that it's an absolute it's a crazy situation with streaming because it's very hard to know what's going to streaming, what's streaming in Canada, what's streaming in the US. It's just like the Wild West right now in terms of how you access this stuff. So even though there's an incredible amount of stuff out there, it's often hard to figure out where it is. and what will have a theater play, what won't, and the old what they used to call windows, where there'd be theaters and then it would be DVD, Blu-ray, then it would be online streaming. All those windows are collapsing; they're being broken, which is really shaking up the industry in a big way, and it's very hard to see where it's going to go.
April, what's your view as a filmmaker on this exclusive window for cinemas that apparently now is disappearing?
We lost the Blu-ray DVD window. It feels like, 7 years ago, and it is shrinking. The windows of revenue are shrinking. But I do believe that now that audience have had over a year of getting content when they want it on the platforms they want it, we have to move with them. And even though, films are created for the big screen, and I am a huge lover of the big screen, and there's something incredible to watch, the feeling of watching in a community. That's what we make films for. But you also do, as the filmmakers and producers, have to give your content to the consumers and where they want it at the time they want it, because now it's just kind of very immediate. And I don't think there's any going backwards, because they've had a year of this kind of spoiled / they can watch whatever they want whenever they want in their living room. And I think those theater lovers will still go to the theater because we love the grandness and the beautiful, aspect of surround sound and watching it on the big screen. There's nothing like it. But for those who want to watch it on their iPad, they're going to do so, whether or not, they'll find a way. So if the windows shrink, hopefully the momentum of the film's release will just still be, the momentum will happen and the word of mouth will happen and spread. And hopefully your film at the end of the day will be seen by even more viewers in different platforms with different revenues. And it's just kind of reimagining that than ever before.
Well, here's what the director, Denis Villeneuve, had to say about all this. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up. People can read along. Streaming services are a positive and powerful addition to the movie and TV ecosystems. But I want the audience to understand that streaming alone can't sustain the film industry as we knew it before COVID. Streaming can produce great content, but not movies of Dune's scope and scale. Warner Brothers' decision means Dune won't have the chance to perform financially in order to be viable, and piracy will ultimately triumph. Warner Brothers might just have killed the Dune franchise. April, do you think he's right about that?
I guess we'll have to see. It is tragic to have a film of such magnitude and such gorgeous grand landscapes, which is built and shot listed for the big screen, to have it condensed down to an iPad or a phone is just, and then the windows shrink, and financially it might never be the same. But we do have to move with what's happening in the current times. It's difficult. It's a very difficult position to be in.
Peter, what's your take on what Denis Villeneuve had to say?
I agree. Denis really loves the big screen, as do all movie critics. So it pains both of us. I know Denis, and it's very painful to see something that should be on the big screen to be on the small screen. But I mean, anybody who can predict where this is all going to shake out must have been snacking on psychedelic gummy bears, because it's very hard to figure out where it's all going to go. I do think that people want to get back to the theaters. I mean, they talk about the Zoom effect, the Zoom fatigue, right? I think that is real. I certainly feel it myself. I'm Zooming all the time. I can hardly wait to get back to the theaters. I mean, I do this annual postcard of my favorite films, and I was looking at, there's only 2 of them that I saw in a theater. So for the first time in 25 years, I saw most of my movies on a small screen, which is crazy.
I think you're getting some good laughs from the audience here on that psychedelic gummy bears comment. Where'd you pluck that from?
Straight out of my noggin. I don't even know if they're available, but if they are, let me know.
April, tell me this. I guess there's been some discussion at the Academy Awards as well as to whether or not a movie that actually doesn't play in a cinema is actually a movie. If it's content that's created and goes straight to streaming, in your view, as a filmmaker, is it still a motion picture?
This is an ongoing discussion as well. And do you qualify? Because currently the qualifications are a certain amount of screens and a certain amount of time frame. And, where do we fit in now that we aren't on the big screen? My love is for the big screen, and movies is meant to be shared on the big screen in a community setting. And I am a lover of that. So I guess time will tell. And I think this year there will be films that did not make it to the big screen will still qualify and will still be considered a feature film.
Dan, if it doesn't show up at the Royal, is it really a movie?
No, it's not. It has to be at the Royal to be a movie. No, storytelling is storytelling, and despite what happens with COVID and how we eventually get out of this, storytellers will always exist, and these platforms are just as important as any other, including the big screen, to get your message out there.
Alexandra, how worried are you about the fact that movies seem to be so many more now going straight to the streaming services and bypassing cinemas altogether?
Well, it's a changing landscape, and definitely there's no getting around that. We just have to move with it, and with the dissolution of exhibition windows, I think we're going to see a lot more of things being available in cinema and online at the same time, and it will be up to audiences to choose. Ultimately, the cinema lovers like April and me and all of us on this call will go to the movies. I don't think we'll lose that. I think it's an innate human desire to share in storytelling in a collective environment. I don't think that's going to go away. I think the content will shift, and our audience will shift with it, but it won't go away.
You know, there is something, it's kind of bizarre if you think about it, as opposed to the comfort of your own home where you can do whatever you like, whenever you like, you can stop it, you can go to the fridge, you can, etc. People still, 100 years later, want to sit in a crowded room with complete strangers and have that experience. It really
All
does.
about the popcorn.
It's partly about the popcorn, I guess. Peter, you had your hand up. What do you think?
Yeah, I can second that emotion. You know, the Sundance Film Festival starts tomorrow, and I'm going to be spending the next week in my basement in my office, going back and forth between screens, pretending I'm at a real festival, trying to watch between 4 and 5 movies a day. That is a lot harder than doing it in person. It's so much better doing it in person. I find the psychic strain, I guess, moving back and forth, even though it's so convenient, it's not really that great.
April, just give us some insight into the business here. Are you going forward, have to renegotiate what you do if, for example, that window for the movie theater is no longer there and you're going straight to streaming services?
I guess so. Agents and managers are speaking about the bonuses that we normally get in terms of theatrical releases, because if you make a certain amount of box office, sometimes the director will get a bonus financially because either they've invested or reinvested their original fee. So the new world will have to shift, and maybe it'll be like a certain amount of downloads or a certain amount of clicks, or whether we're on iTunes for the top 10 for the first 2 weeks, maybe there'll be a financial bonus in the new kind of digital streaming aspects, but it will have to shift and be renegotiated and rethought through. And the industry doesn't have defined terms for that yet.
Okay, in our last 2 minutes here, let me give a minute each to the two people who run movie houses here and come full circle from what Peter hinted at the beginning. There is optimism out there. Dan, what are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic that we all stay safe and positive and look forward to the future when we can all gather. We are social creatures. It's not healthy for all of us to be locked in our living rooms and our basements. We need to get out and interact with each other. And that was the important aspect, I think, of the old single screen theater, or refurbished single screen theater, as the Regent and the Royal have done, and the Paradise, is to go in and enjoy a film together and have the opportunity to go out and discuss it and share your thoughts. We'll all just hope and pray that day comes sooner than later.
Alexandra, what gives you confidence that your business is going to come back?
Well, I completely share the optimism and the hope that we will come back from this. And my hope is that we come back stronger. Our venue itself, the physical bones of the place, will be uplifted. It will be an experience coming to the Regent that will be new for people who have been our regulars, and for our new audience as well. But I'm optimistic that we'll be able to actually cultivate a new audience. People who are suffering from Zoom fatigue, maybe a younger generation who are totally screened out at home and want a new experience, and perhaps coming to the Regent is new for them. So I'm really excited about bringing people back together and expanding our audience and being able to offer a shared experience to people. Again, we are, as everybody has said, we're social creatures, and I can't wait to bring that back, whether it's 50 people or whether it's 450 people.
It's the one thing I've heard more than anything else over the past 10 months, what people miss, going to the movies. I hear it all the time. Alexandra Seay, April Mullen, Peter Howell, Dan Peel. It's so good of all of you to spend some time with us on TVO tonight. Go and see Wander, everybody. Tommy Lee Jones, April Mullen's picture. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.